Welcome to DisciplesNet Church. We are so glad you've joined us for worship. Feel free to join in with hymns, pray with us, and share in communion. Wherever and whenever you are joining us, God's Spirit and people from all over the world are here with you. So let's prepare our hearts for worship.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When the darkness appears and the light draws near, and the day is past and gone, at the river I stand. Guide my feet, hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home. Take my hand, precious Lord, and lead me home.
As we come to this moment of prayer, I'd like to start with a special request for you to remember our preacher today, Richard Propes, in your prayers. He's had an extraordinarily difficult last few months, and yet he is here to preach to us a word of overcoming in spite of the hardships of life. And you see the many different ways that artists have depicted Christ in their paintings from around the world. You rarely see a picture of Christ in a wheelchair. But when you see Richard in his wheelchair and the unselfish way that he helps raise awareness of caring for the least, the ones that are forgotten and have no one to speak up for them, that's when I do see a picture of Christ in the world at work today, as the hands and heart and wheels of Christ. Join me now as we come to God in this moment of prayer. Gracious God, we do indeed give thanks for your presence with us. We give thanks for life, and we give thanks for each person with us now listening here. We ask that you hear their prayers, their troubles, their griefs, and their joys. We ask that you lead them and guide them in the ways forward. We ask that you be with those who grieve, with those who are ill, with those who are afraid, with those who have lost loved ones. Especially during this time of the pandemic, gracious Lord, So often we don't know what to do, and many of us are separated from those we love and the things that we had hoped for, planned for. Please guide us in your ways. In this new time, may we find ways to be your servants and overcome despite all odds. We ask, O Lord, that you be with the leaders. Please give them wise judgment and help them to work together. We ask that you are with those who serve others, the first responders, the healthcare workers, those who serve on the front lines. May you protect and guide and guard them. And may your comforter be with them in the difficult times. And may you lead them forward with courage and your sense of comfort and compassion for one another. Gracious God, do help us to be one as we encounter and try to overcome the troubles of this world. Help us work together as one people, guided by your love and your compassion and wisdom. God, we lift up to you Richard Propes this day. We ask that you continue to surround him with your love, your healing spirit, the courage and the voice that you give him to be your word. Please help him to also feel your healing touch, your solace in time of grief, your courage and wisdom for the difficult days ahead. We thank you for being our mighty God and guiding our paths ahead. Hear us now as we join together in praying the prayer that Jesus taught us, saying, Our Father,
who art in heaven,
hallowed be
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
I was lying there in the hospital. I'd been admitted less than 24 hours before. A semi-casual emergency room visit had turned into an unexpectedly urgent hospitalization due to dehydration, exhaustion, and a raging infection that was threatening my heart. Now, to be honest with you, I was no stranger to health concerns. I was no stranger to disability. I was born in 1965 with spina bifida. It's a birth defect that at that time, in 1965, led to the death of 95% of the babies born with it. I was already a paraplegic. I was a double below-knee amputee. By the time I found myself in the hospital on November 17th, 2019, despite a myriad of lifelong health issues and well over 50 surgeries inpatient, and probably another 50 outpatient, I had actually not been inpatient for over 30 years. I found myself shocked that what I had believed to be a simple case of dehydration had in fact turned into something that was life-threatening. So there I was, someone who'd been relatively stable for 30 years, someone who lived independently, someone who worked full-time, who was vibrantly active and who had just, in fact, completed a long-distance wheelchair event. But there I was. I was lying in this ridiculously uncomfortable hospital bed, too exhausted to move, too sick to even turn myself over. Initially, it was expected to be a short hospital stay. But as the lab results started to come in, things changed. It was increasingly obvious that I was a lot sicker than anyone had realized. And suddenly, I was hooked up to a telemetry machine. I was hooked up to IV fluids. I was hooked up to IV antibiotics, and they were flowing nonstop in an effort to combat the infection that was running rampant throughout my body. Now then, let me prepare you up front that what I'm going to say next is kind of a little bit gross, to be honest. But you know how it is. Sometimes life is gross. I was lying in my bed, my hospital bed, and I wasn't allowed to leave it on, at least not alone. I wasn't allowed to do much of anything, actually, without help. But I was still clinging to this idea that, maybe I was actually in control. I built this life on the fact that I could take care of myself. And there was no way I was going to give that up without a fight. I mean, in my mind, these doctors, these nurses, they didn't need to know that I used a catheter. They didn't need to know that I had continence issues and was secretly terrified that my body was going to explode at any given moment, thanks to all of these fluids flushing their way through my body and all of these really hardcore antibiotics. I didn't feel like they needed to know that I had a history of being sexually assaulted, and that any kind of intimate examination or kind of intimate caregiving sent me into flashbacks. And it just really scared me. They didn't need to know that I had body image issues because of that childhood abuse that left me scarred, it left me physically damaged, and always questioning my physical worthiness. They didn't need to know that in my mind. They didn't. They didn't need to know that I was scared. I was really scared. I was scared that the life that I had worked so hard to build was about to go out the window. They didn't need to know that I was scared of losing my job and my friends and this world that I had created that I honestly loved. I really, really loved. They really didn't need to know. That's how I felt. Except, as you can probably guess, they really did need to know. They needed to know because, quite simply, they couldn't love me back to life if they didn't know. And so I told them. Now, I would love to tell you that, this was just some sort of spiritual insight, and I just, was overwhelmingly honest, and I had a great conversation with them. But I got to be honest with you and tell you, that would be lying. That is not how it happened. No, instead, here's what happened. It was the kind of truth that comes rushing out of you when IV fluids meet IV antibiotics, and all of that water that they've been telling me to drink would start working their little body flushing magic. And before I could even think about asking for help, I was surrounded by the kind of hardcore bodily fluid truth that I can't possibly hide from myself or anyone else. And they needed to know. They needed to know that I needed help. They needed to know that I could no longer handle my life and my body alone. They needed to know that I was hiding and I was scared and I was embarrassed. And I was so sorry that they had to deal with this. It was gross. I got to tell you, it was gross. And it felt gross. And I hated every single minute of it. But I got to tell you something. They needed to know. Now, I don't know if it was God. I don't know if it was the universe, or maybe with just my secretly rebellious body. But I told them, and when Adrian walked into my hospital room, and I assure you, hers is a name that I'm never going to forget. She seemed to instinctively know that I was in pain, and she seemed to instinctively know that I was hiding something. She seemed to know that I was ashamed of my body and the way it was acting. This body that I felt like had betrayed me. And she seemed to know that. And then she did something that I had kind of forgotten over the years that I even really needed. She nurtured me. She did. She showed up. She looked at my truth, and she didn't turn away. She looked beyond what I was willing to let her see, what I was willing to let her know. She did something. I would probably call it love. I am almost 100% certain that she would call it simply being a nurse. Whatever it was, there was something about it that reached me as I was lying there in that bed, feeling hopeless and feeling helpless, and wondering where my life was going, and wondering what all of this meant. She found my secrets, and I mean she found all of my secrets. She found secrets I wouldn't want anyone to know. And she didn't turn away. And I got to tell you, in all honesty, I was embarrassed every single time. I apologized every single time. I eventually confessed my history as a victim of sexual assault. And the only admonishment I got was, why did you wait so long to tell us? We need to know. Now, I would love to tell you that all of this ends with some sort of Hallmark Channel happy greeting card ending. Sometimes the Hallmark Channel turns into the Lifetime Channel. And if you've never watched the Lifetime Channel, well, it's a lot more dramatic. It's not usually as happy, and you don't usually get a happy ending. It's not always pretty. It's not always pretty. But somewhere within that messiness, there's still something that I think is pretty darn holy. Within 5 days of hospitalization, it was obvious that my body was healing, but I had a left leg. I still had my upper left leg and most of my lower, and it wasn't healing. 48 hours after a medical consult, that leg was gone, and I became an above-knee amputee. I'm a little over about 3-4 months from the loss of that upper leg. That leg gave me mobility and stability and greater independence. I was discharged from the hospital over the Thanksgiving Day weekend here in the U.S. It was a surprise discharge because a rehab stay was denied, and I was still struggling with those IV antibiotics and those fluids. I was sent home. I was sent home where I was alone with home health support and a blurred vision about my future. I was confident, kind of. Yet as always seems to be true in my life, I found holiness everywhere that I turned. I found holiness in Reverend Anastasia, who is this really delightful, intuitive, Unitarian Universalist minister who self-identifies as an atheist, but who reminds me of God's presence constantly. I found holiness in the anesthesiologist, who, with remarkable skills of observation, saw that I started having a flashback when she placed a mask near my face. And she stopped. She stopped everything she was doing to prepare for the surgery. And she reassured me, and she waited for me to go to sleep before moving the mask over my face. There were so many others, who showed up in ways ranging from simple service to rich, deep, and vulnerable acts of giving, support, and authenticity. My instant thought was, I don't know how, but I just have this feeling I'm going to be okay. I mean, I've just been through the hardest 6 months of my life in at least 30 years. A 10-day hospitalization followed by 3.5 months at home of rehab. I returned to work for 1 week, and then this coronavirus pandemic hit, and I was returned home to work from home for the last 2 months. So I had been secluded for most of the last 6 months. And just last week, my only brother, passed away from pancreatic cancer. This past 6 months, I got to tell you, it's been filled with trauma and drama and chaos and uncertainty and fear and grief and utter helplessness. And it's not over yet. And I don't want to sugarcoat it or soften it. I don't want you to think that I'm grateful for amputation, because I got to tell you, I'm not. I'm not. I miss my leg. I also don't want you to think that I'm advocating for any kind of helplessness, because that would make this a really weird Sunday message. But what I am trying to say is that we need to know. We need to know each other. We need to know ourselves. We need to know each other. We need to know each other's hopes and dreams. We need to know each other's joys and sorrows. We need to know each other's truths. We need to know each other's scars. We need to know our wounded spaces and what it takes for each of us to feel loved. We need to know what makes each other laugh. We need to know what makes each other cry. We need to know how to be present with each other, and we need to know what light flickers in our souls. We need to know each other's strengths and weaknesses and abilities and disabilities and shame-filled secrets and what gives us hope. Different people will know different things about us, and a select, precious few will know just about everything there is to know, because they need to know, and we need them to know. I think to myself about these past 6 months, and I think to myself about 1 John 4:4. My dear children, you come from God and you belong to God. You have already won a big victory over those false teachers. For the Spirit in you is far stronger than anything in the world. And I think to myself that that's true. I think to myself over the past 6 months, all those things that would try to convince me that I'm unworthy of God's love, that I'm unworthy of your love. And it's all untrue. We show up as we are. We show up in all our glorious imperfections, our flaws, our weaknesses, our challenges. Through these times like I've had during the 6 months, we have the glory of showing up with and for one another and loving one another back to life. We need to know each other. My prayer for you this fine day is that wherever you are, whatever you're experiencing, whether you're quarantined in a pandemic or in a war zone, or living on the streets, or living in the riches, wherever you're at, may you know, really know, and be surrounded by people who absolutely know your life, who know how to love you, and you know how to love them, May you, my dear children, know that you come from God, you belong to God, you have already won a big victory over those things that in your life are false teachers, whether they are people, places, things, or experiences. Because the Spirit in you is far stronger than anything in the world. And so it is. Amen.
I was there to hear your warning cry. I'll be there when you are old. I rejoice the day you were baptized to see your life unfold. I was there when you were but a child, with a faith too soon to well. In a blaze of light you wandered off to find where demons dwell. When you heard the wonder of the word, I was there to cheer you on. You were raised to praise the living God, to whom you now belong. If you find someone to share your time, and you join your hearts as one, I'll be there to make your verses rhyme from dusk till rising sun. In the middle ages of your life, not too old, no longer young, I'll be there to guide you through the night, complete what I've begun. When the evening gently closes in, and you shut your weary eyes, I'll be there as I have always been, with just one more surprise. I was there to hear your warning cry. I'll be there when you are old. I rejoice the day you were baptized to see your life unfold.
Whenever we come to this table, we are telling and we are showing. We are telling the words that Jesus said to his disciples, and we are showing how he offered up the bread and the cup, just as he offered up his life. We come here because we are a welcoming people. We come here because we are a caring people. We come here because we are a resurrection people. Please pray with me. God, be with us as we remember and celebrate your Son by telling and showing what he did. Amen. It was on the last night that Jesus spent with his disciples that he took bread. He blessed it and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body broken for you. Whenever you do this, remember me." In the same manner, after supper, he took the cup. He said, "This is my life poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Whenever you do this, remember me." For it is as long as we eat of this bread and drink of this cup that we remember the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus the Christ.
When I